Prospector News is media for educational purposes only and should not be construed as advice. We are not a certified financial analyst, licensed broker, or fund dealer, exempt market dealer, or hold a license to provide financial advice. We provide no legal opinion regarding accounting, tax, or law issues. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or the solicitation to buy or sell stocks or commodities. All opinions expressed are those of the participants and should not be relied upon when making investment decisions. Those decisions should be made with the advice of a personal financial advisor. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please hit the like and share buttons and be sure to hit subscribe. This is Michael Fox, and you're listening to the Prospector News podcast. Joining me, I have Chris Temple of the National Investor, longtime contributor to the Prospector News. Welcome aboard, Chris.
Hey, good to be with you as always, Mike.
So as we look in our rearview mirror at COVID leaving us, hopefully soon, the theme in the past 2 years has all been about the FAANG stocks, the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Apple. A little bit out of order, but as we move into the future, we seem to be taking those old FAANGs and replacing them with new FAANGs. So fill us in on where you see the new FAANGs.
Well, look, the old FAANGs served a purpose for a lot of people for quite a few years. You know, each of those stocks became almost an asset class unto themselves. They were leaders in their field, huge market caps, and it was almost automatic money when you put money into these things. But the growth days for these companies in different ways is behind them. The Fed is raising interest rates. Valuations matter way more in that environment. So the FAANGs, the old FAANGs, have fallen on hard times. In fact, as a group, they've all done considerably worse than the general stock market in 2022 as measured by the S&P 500. Replacing them for a lot of reasons are what some of us are calling the new FAANGs. You know, there's a handful of us that have talked about this for many months. A couple of brokers earlier this year actually coalesced all of these themes into this theme, the new FAANGs. And so let me tell you what FAANG stands for now, Mike. The F stands for fuel, of course, of most kinds. Leading the old energy, of course, is oil and gas, that type of thing, even coal. The first A stands for aerospace and defense because of the technological advances in aerospace. Unfortunately, the warmongers still running the world. I don't like defense stocks per se, but there's a lot of new technology and a lot of resource themes that center in aerospace. As countries like the US and Canada need to be able to control all of these things ourselves. So I would even put things like titanium, rare earths, helium, which is a sleeper in the whole aerospace thing. The second A stands for agriculture. The world still needs to eat. The world is growing, and agriculture has become a theme, kind of like oil and gas, where you've had skyrocketing prices, shortages in different parts of the world. And of course, a lot of that exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. N stands chiefly for nuclear energy, which is, I've said this for a year and a half or so now, uranium is the single best fundamental setup, even after the big move it's had in the last year and a half, of any commodity you can look at, bar none. And it's going to lead the way in a new generation, that some of which will come in fits and starts in renewable sources of energy and in carbon-free sources of energy, which of course there's not a bigger carbon-free source of energy in the world than nuclear power, which is at the beginning of a new renaissance. And last but not least, G stands for gold and other metals and minerals. There are distinctions, of course, among them, as which ones have got better fundamental setups, which ones are more conducive to an inflation or to stagflation or whatnot. But all of these things in different ways, and this is the reason for this theme. You've got a situation where for many years there was underinvestment, underdevelopment of a lot of key commodities in the world, and it's coming back to bite us all right now. It's most stark, of course, with oil and gas, but it's going to go all the way down the food chain with the rest of these too, Mike.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's been a lot of lack of love for the junior mining people that we work with on a regular basis. And I'm just looking at this train that's barreling down the tracks and going like, it's gotta, we're going to have to accelerate to get in front of this train before it hits.
Well, you're right. And, the environment for junior resource stocks generally has been abysmal for a while. I mean, you go back a summer and a half, well, about 2 years ago, I guess, in this August was the first time that the gold price nominally in US dollar terms went above $2,000 an ounce. A lot of the juniors, along with the larger players, were doing really well at that time. When gold hit 2,000 again, briefly earlier this year, most of those stocks weren't within a mile of where they were 2 summers ago. And it's only gotten worse for most of them since then. One of these days, a light bulb is going to go off over investors' heads. They're going to realize, generalist investors who are ignoring a lot of these types of themes right now, that this is where the value is for the future. But, we're just not there yet. And look, even between here and a much broader rip-roaring bull market for commodities of almost all kinds, that's probably going to be with us for years, not all in a straight line, not all at the same time either. We're probably going to go through some more pain first. Is the Fed going to pull out one too many sticks in this game of monetary Jenga it's caused, and we get somewhat of a repeat of 2008 all over again, where they break something in the markets, briefly everything tumbles, even if it's already tumbled, it tumbles more, and then they've got to reverse course, print more money. And then when we get to the other side of that is when commodities in a broader sense will really have their rip, when the new FAANG theme will really resonate with people who aren't paying attention to it yet.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I look at a lot of the things that the Fed does, and I remember when I was in university, if I even suggested half the stuff the Fed's done in the last couple of years, I would have gotten a failing grade and a suggestion to pursue another interest.
Well, yeah, but today you'd be trotted out in front of Senate committees here in the U.S. Like Janet Yellen is this week again, and you listen to this woman, and it's startling how condescending, disingenuous, and dumb in varying parts the top Treasury official on the entire planet can be. But she is. I mean, I made the comment the other day that when you listen to just the inane comments, the belated recognition of being horribly wrong on inflation, so many other things come out of this woman's mouth. It's like somebody went out under some viaduct and scooped up some homeless bag lady and threw her in front of the Senate and said, "Here, this is what you got to talk about." I mean, it's that bad. And this is who's running the world. So it doesn't give you too much confidence in our policymakers going forward. You don't have it any better up there.
No, we don't. I've been on the record for the last couple of years, and I speak for both of our countries, and what's even in Europe too. We as a society have got to stop electing idiots.
Yeah, but that's what we get, and it reminds me of something I saw the other day. You've probably seen this kind of a meme also, where I think it was under a picture of Biden or something like that. It says, of all the mammals in the world, only humans are the ones that put the dumbest of them in charge of the pack.
Yeah, true. But at least ours is pretty.
Right. Well, depending on what disguise he wears each week.
Well, yeah, that's true. He does like to play. We used to have a children's show up here in Canada called Mr. Dress Up, and it kind of reminds me of that from time to time.
Oh, yeah.
So as the Fed moves along, how much longer can they actually continue to raise interest rates before you do think they will break something?
Well, here's the thing that people have got to understand these days. When we talk about Fed policy and its effect on the markets, you've got to put an asterisk next to markets. I remember when I first got in this industry, there was no such thing as quantitative easing. There was no such thing that anybody knew of except in a a minor sense as the Fed's balance sheet. And you had a business cycle, okay? And the business cycle was driven by the economy. When the economy did well and was getting too hot and leading to higher prices, the Fed, kind of like a governor on a boiler, a relief valve on a boiler, needed to raise interest rates so that things didn't overheat. And then when the economy slowed down, the Fed responded with monetary policy on that sense. But for almost 40 years now, we don't start with a business cycle in the organic economy. What we start with is a credit cycle. So it's credit creation is a first matter that drives economic growth, and then therefore also drives the markets. And that's where this thing called the wealth effect was first dreamed of and created by Paul Volcker 40 years ago, who, as I've said a million times, and some of these commentaries are on my website, so I won't waste time with them now, he is remembered for completely the wrong thing. Because after Volcker raised interest rates to enormously high levels and killed the inflation in in commodities and things like that in the early 1980s, he changed the entire focus of the Fed and started the modern day regimen of creating inflation in asset prices instead. And this is why we've had these cycles of increasing ferocity, of these big booms in asset prices, and boom, then it falls back down again. Then the Fed's got to levitate everything again, and boom, it goes down again. So if all we were talking about today, Mike, was just the organic economy, there is so much liquidity out there that the Fed has created in the last 2 or 2.5 years that we could plod along for quite a while and have, at least a lackluster economy, not maybe even technically a recession. But even when we do officially have a recession, which the pundits and the bookworms say is 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, we already had one in the first quarter. I don't know if the second quarter is going to be that bad. We'll find out in about 5 weeks. But even with that, it's going to be a very uneven thing. Already, if you look at the average retailer, they're all in trouble, or most of them are, because they've got burgeoning inventory, sales are down, their costs are up. And yet, when you look at other spending habits on the part of the populations, this jump in fuel to a record high for both gasoline and diesel has amounted to zero so far in a form of demand destruction. People sat at home for 2+ years, and they'll be damned if they're going to sit at home this summer. They'll suck it up. They'll pay the prices for gasoline and diesel, which is going to keep prices levitated, even if they're going to start curtailing spending elsewhere. And they are curtailing spending elsewhere. You look at lumber has been cut in half from its high, partly because supply chains have straightened out, but also because the jump in mortgage rates and the jump in other costs has had some impact on the amount of new permits for homes. But even there, you don't have anything that's a big threat. So that's all the economy in a hurried look. The other thing, though, you got to keep in the back of your mind is the Fed tightens policy are the markets, because you've got zillions of dollars of new credit created in the last 2 or 2.5 years at 0% basically nominal cost. And the amount of pain that you inflict along the food chain in credit instruments, in the derivatives markets and so forth, even by what seem historically to be, almost laughable increases in interest rates, okay, they're going to break something at some point in the markets. And so that's the other thing we got to be looking over our shoulder for. If they're really lucky, they don't actually break anything, but they slow down things enough so that at some point down the road, inflation is fluttering back down somewhat, and the economy is slow, and they say, okay, we'll stop, we'll take a pause. But we don't have time today to go into every conceivable possible scenario, but almost any way you flesh any of this out, the new FAANGs are a theme that wins. Some win more in some scenarios than others, but almost everywhere you look, the new FAANGs are going to be the big theme. And eventually you will see a situation down the road where the general investing public and Wall Street embrace them as almost insanely as they did the old FAANGs. In fact, I saw a friend of mine, Jim Uriel, who's a commentator on financial television from the Chicago area. He made a comment earlier today. He says, there's no way I'm going to stop buying ExxonMobil just because it got to a new high and continues to hit new highs. I'll worry about buying ExxonMobil the day that Kathy Wood adds it to her ARC fund. Then the party will be over. That was his characterization.
Yeah, it's kind of like the old Jimmy the Greek football prognosticating. You'd listen to see what the Greek picked and then go the other way.
Pretty much. So look, there is a lot of room. And you know, and the reason for all of these things, and this is important to understand, because yes, there could be transitory times, to use a badly abused term by the Fed in the last couple of years. There could be those transitory times where commodity prices get hit temporarily for different reasons. But going forward, there is one major underlying theme underneath pretty much all of them. And that is many years worth of being out of favor, therefore many years worth of underinvestment. And again, they're all different in many ways, but I'll tell you, I listened just this morning, early, I think he was on like 6 o'clock this morning with a guest spot on CNBC, but one of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to commodities markets is Jeff Curry, who is the head commodities guy at Goldman Sachs. We don't always like Goldman Sachs, but this guy is worth listening to. And actually, it reminds me that later on when we get off of here, I've got to find a video and I'm going to send that out to everybody, including yourself. But he made this point again this morning. He said, don't forget, and he was using, and I'll use quickly, the oil market as an example. It was only 2 years ago that the oil industry was getting annihilated. They had huge losses. They were writing down assets. You had a brief time where crude oil went negative in the spot market, where natural gas was concerned in Western Canada and the Northeast US and a few other places. From time to time, you couldn't give natural gas away. There was too much of it. And now all of a sudden we've swung incredibly in the other direction, and years of underinvestment are catching up to all of us. So his point was that, yeah, you've had a nice move in a lot of these energy stocks, but still the broad public is not participating. The S&P 500's makeup of energy is under 5%, yet double that in terms of the percentage of earnings right now that energy is contributing to the S&P 500. So it's going to be another 18 months from, we've gone 18 months roughly from the bottom of that sector. For the next 18 months, it's going to kind of ratify what the first 18 months did. So then after 3 years of a move is when you're going to get the hedge funds back in, you're going to get the mutual funds back in, you're going to get the Edward Joneses and all of the other financial planning firms, the Ameriprises. They won't be able to ignore it anymore. And the initial investors in this move will have already made several times their money, but then things will really accelerate, and you'll really get into Wall Street's recognition and participation in that move. That's still ahead of us. Nuclear energy, uranium stocks have already had a huge move for about the last 18 months, give or take a little bit. They've blown off a couple of times recently, but still several times above their bottoms of a year and a half or 2 years ago. And they're only getting started. And partly because, even more so than with oil and gas, the average investor is paying zero attention. You don't hear about nuclear. There was a huge move announcement just this last week, where down here, Mike, President Biden, who has screwed up almost everything he's touched on both conventional energy and green energy alike, at least the nuclear has been less bad. And he now wants the money spent that has long since been appropriated to support the local industry in the US, to get us off of Russia and Russia influenced sources of imported uranium and enriched uranium, and do it here in the US. And that should have been huge news. And
yeah, it should have been a lot bigger news than it was. I got tipped to that by our mutual friend Scott Mellenby over at Uranium Energy Corporation, as they were cleaning up their balance sheet with regards to Aiden's purchase back of Uranium One and repatriating that back into into America away from Russia again. But
Yep. So
yeah,
going forward,
you
all
know,
of these themes,
it's almost like they want to do the right thing, but they're scared to because somebody's gonna, you know, yell at them for it.
yeah, well, we'll see. But look, all of these different commodities and things going forward, it's been so many years that we've all circulated those old graphs showing the valuation of financial assets compared to the valuation of commodities. And everybody that listening to us is, I'm sure, seen one or more examples of this over time. There's been a little bit of catch up recently, but a lot of things are going to coalesce, and it may first take another bust before we really are, in the clear on these themes. But however it comes about, 3 years and more so 5 years plus down the road, you're going to be very happy if you invest in the new themes and stay the hell away from the new FAANGs, I'm sorry, and stay away from the old FAANGs.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Now, as we start to pivot away from globalization and some of our manufacturing industries get repatriated back to North America, is that going to accelerate the need for the new FAANGs in a lot of ways?
In some ways it will, particularly speaking for us down here in the US, where we've been much more guilty, especially in base metals and battery metals, of underinvestment and underdevelopment. We got a lot of catching up to do. Now it's going to take a political change to get things off of dead center. Maybe it'll come as early as if the Republican Party down here gets back the House and Senate in the midterm elections in November, and they yank President Biden back to the center and away from the loony left. Maybe it's going to take a new president. Maybe it's going to take a big economic crisis for enough people to say, okay, we've dragged our feet long enough. We're way behind in building the green economy. We've underinvested in everything else. And somehow, no matter how it comes about, we get adults back in charge. And then there's a lot of really cheap assets in the US. In all of these areas, whether it's uranium, whether it's gold, whether it's base metals, battery metals, oil and gas, a lot of stuff that will do very, very well. And yes, a lot of it is going to be driven by this move away from globalization, and frankly, by the new commodity wars. I mean, and you and I talked when we saw one another in Chicago about this, that Russia's going into Ukraine, and that whole war and all of the sanctions and counter sanctions as a part of that whole thing have accelerated a lot of these moves exponentially, which were already underway. And now we're really feeling them. There would probably not have been the move to domestic uranium as fast as there is now, especially with Biden and his kind in there, were it not for this political imperative that they have to get off of Russian uranium. Same is going to be.
I agree. I just I shake my head, Chris. We in Canada should be a world superpower in energy. We have all the old stuff, and we have everything we need for the new green economy going forward. And uranium coming out of our hiney up in northern Saskatchewan. And we have the largest energy consumer in the world just to our southern border in your country. And, why we're not working together as countries to exploit that and deal with our own stuff locally is beyond me.
Well, I'll tell you, to leave on a positive note, the point will come when the voters in both of our countries, and more so industry and economies and everything, are so tired and so damaged by the numbskulls that are asleep at the switch now, that somehow or other we will get adults back in charge. We will get people that understand that electric vehicles don't come out of some magic extrusion machine, etc. And we can actually have, even though we're going to go through some pain and shortages and things like that along the way, it's mind-blowing to me, the renaissance that we can have as we build the economy of the future around energy and other things, the upside that both Canada and the US have. There's no reason for us to have to continue to exploit third world sources for a lot of these things, though there are a lot of good investment themes elsewhere, no question. but there's a lot we can be doing within our own four walls. And someday when we get the right people back in charge again, it'll be salad days for certain industries and for investors who get in them on the ground floor.
That sounds great to me. And let's end this on that positive note before we go back to reality of our own times right now. For those who want to get a hold of you and learn more about the National Investor, Chris, how do they do so?
Just simply go to my website, nationalinvestor.com. There's all kinds of recent goodies on there, videos, commentaries, and whatnot on a variety of different subjects. You can join my mailing list for free, or you can sign up where you'll get all of my specific investment recommendations. But just go to nationalinvestor.com and look around and follow the yellow brick road.
Wonderful. I look forward to having more economic talks with you down the road.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining me.
Yep. Take care, Mike.